So hi, welcome to today's lunchtime lesson. So we're doing a grammar focus today, but as always with grammar, we're looking at lots of other things surrounding that. So we're going to be looking at the pragmatics of the structure. We're going to be looking at the pronunciation of the structure. We're going to be looking also at collocations with the structure. So words that we very often use together with it. So we're going to do a bit of revision of a very commonly used structure, the present perfect. And the first thing that I want us to just consider is why we use the present perfect, right? So remember that when you're learning English, it's really important with English grammar to approach it from the point of view of pragmatics. So if you missed our last class where we talked more about what pragmatics is, pragmatics basically means why we use language, the purpose of it, what it's expressing. So for example, if I say I'm going to visit my mum, I'm expressing a future plan in that context. Yeah. So I've put this diagram together because I'm a very visual learner, which might help you kind of sort of picture where we're using the present perfect and how it's going to be applied. So we've got our kind of main, most commonly used structures in English here. This line separates the past and the present, okay? And if you look at our little symbol here for the present perfect, you'll see it's something which is beginning in the past, but has this connection into the present as well, yeah? And when we think about the present perfect, I like to think of it as a bit like a time traveling tense, okay? It's going to connect you between these two time periods, the past and the present, yeah? It'll always have that connection between the two. So when we think about the function of the present perfect, why we're using it, there's lots of different reasons that we use it, but we can put it into two categories, yeah? Finished actions, actions which are completed, and unfinished actions as well. So if we talk first of all about unfinished actions, because this really just has one use. So if I use the present perfect to express an unfinished action, that's when I'm describing how long this action has lasted, okay? And we're referring to an action which began in the past, but it's not complete. It's still going on. For example, I've known my best friend for 25 years, okay? I met her in the past, we became friends in the past, but we're still friends now. That action continues. Or I've lived in Scotland since 2012. That's when I started the action in 2012, but I still live in Scotland now. So the action isn't completed. So that's this idea of the two times, yeah, the past and the present. So when we use the present perfect to describe unfinished actions, that's when you'll very often see it with those two words, for and since, okay, when we're talking about periods of time. I'm going to explain more about for and since in a little bit, okay, so I'll come back to that. But first, we're going to have a look at the pragmatics. Now, when we're using the present perfect to talk about finished actions, we have various different ways that we do that. So we use the present perfect to discuss life experiences, to focus on present results. We use it very often when we're talking about the news. Okay, so if you listen to a news report, you'll hear the present perfect a lot, or actions which are very recently completed. And we also use it with words which express time that's not complete yet. For example, things like this month, today, or this year. Okay, so let's start with life experiences. So when you're focusing on an experience, when you're talking about experience, we always use the present perfect. Sorry, I've just seen that my board says the past perfect. That's my mistake. The present perfect. A way to think about this, guys, is that an experience, right? That's something that starts in the past, but an experience always stays with you. Yeah, you never lose that experience. The physical action is completed, but the experience stays with you. Okay, so that's a good way to think about why we use the present perfect to talk about life experiences. So for example, I've been to India, but If I'm talking about the details of that trip when I went to India, that's when I use the past simple, okay? And that's because the physical actions are completed, yeah? The way I traveled, if I caught a plane, the hotels I stayed in, all of that is finished, okay? But the experience that I had has stayed with me, yeah? So I would say I've been to India, talking about my experience, but I went for 3 months because those are the details and those are the things which are over. When we talk about life experience with the present perfect, we very often use the words ever or never. For example, have you ever been to Egypt? Or she's never been abroad. Okay, so we have really common collocations with this. Now, if we want to talk about the present perfect to express present results, this is one that can be a little bit difficult. Okay, so if an action is finished or complete, but the results of that action are affecting us now, we use the present perfect. Because basically, what we want to do is focus on the result of the action, not the action itself. For example, if I say I've lost my keys, it doesn't matter how I lost my keys. The important thing is that now it's affecting me. Yeah, and that's what I want to focus on. If I say they've missed the train, it doesn't matter what made them miss the train. The important thing is that now they aren't on the train, and that's what we're focusing on. Very often you could interchange this with the past simple. So I could say, I lost my keys, or they missed the train. This is much more common in American English, okay, in US English. And it doesn't really change the meaning either. But it's more common, I'd say, in British English to use the present perfect here, if we're focusing on our results. Now, another way that the present perfect is used very often is when people are giving news, like on the TV or on the radio, or for actions which are very recently completed. So if you watch the news, the main news bulletin, 6 o'clock, you'll very often hear, for example, the Prime Minister has announced a new policy. So in this case, it's not like what we saw before, where we're focusing on our result. Here, it's not that the result has to be in the present. Again, we could interchange this with the past. Yeah, so I could say the Prime Minister announced a new policy, and that would also be correct. And very often, you'll see it with the words just, yet, already, and recently. And the reason we use that with the news is it gives this idea of immediacy, okay, or breaking news, yeah? So, if someone has said the Prime Minister has just announced a new policy, it makes the news report sound like it's very relevant, very important, and very recent. And that's why you'll very often see it used in media like this. And then the last function we use with the present perfect is for words which express time that isn't completed yet. So words, by that I mean like this month, this week, today, or this year. Yeah. So it means that we're referring to a period of time which is continuing, right? The period of time is not finished yet because today or this year or this month isn't over. For example, I've read 3 books this month, but there's more time. I might read another 3. She hasn't been to see me today, but today isn't finished. She still might come. Or they've had 4 holidays this year, but there's still more time in this year. Maybe they'll go for 1 more holiday. If you're not sure about where to put time expressions, as a general rule, not only for the present perfect, but in English, we normally put time expressions at the end of a sentence. Okay, guys, so I'm just going to very quickly go through how we structure, how we put together the present perfect. So in a positive sentence, it'll be the subject with have or has for the third person and your past participle. Yeah. So if you're learning verbs, that's usually your third column. Okay. Your past participle. For example, we've been to Rome, or she's worked here since 2006. Okay. We always have to use the past participle with perfect tenses. and we normally contract the word have in informal written English, but also when we're speaking. I'll talk about more of that in a second. If we're making it negative, you have your subject, have or has for the third person, not, and the past participle again. So we have not been to Rome. She hasn't worked here since 2006. Okay. Again, we normally contract not to make have negative. So we'd say I haven't, you haven't, or he hasn't, and so on. And finally, if we're making a question, we invert, right? We start with our auxiliary, have or has for the third person, the subject, and the past participle. Have you been to Rome? We can make short answers here. Yes, I have. No, I've not. Or yes, she has. No, she hasn't. Okay. Remember that inversion with have and has and the subject when you're making a question. Now, pronunciation, which is so important, yeah? It's really important here that you contract the auxiliary have and has when you're speaking, and also when you're writing in informal English, okay? Remember that using contractions is one of the best things that you can do to improve your listening skills, because L1 speakers of English always contract, yeah? It also makes you sound much more fluent too when you're speaking. So remember, when we're making question forms, that auxiliary verb like have or had here, like have you been to Spain? Yeah, we use that schwa, the weak vowel, the sound in English. Okay, we don't emphasize it. So it's not have you been to Spain, it's have you. Have you been to Spain? So just try practicing these sentences to yourself, okay? I want you to say them to yourself, and then I'm going to say them and see if we're more or less the same. Yeah. So here are 4 sentences. Yeah. So say them to yourselves individually. Keep your microphones off. And then I'm going to pronounce them for you and see if we said the same thing. Make sure you say it out loud, guys, because pronunciation in your head sounds different to how you produce it. Okay, so the first one here, this contraction will sound, oh, sorry, I had one extra. I forgot to show you. Okay, so the first one here, the contraction here will be like I've, yeah? But remember, you need to make your block of sound. So it's not I've been, that's what's going to be combined as your one sound. I've been to London, okay? She has will contract into she's, yeah? But again, we need to make that block of sound with our participle, right? She's read, not she's read. She's read the book. Have you been to London will become have you, okay? But again, the block of sound. Have you been, not have you been. Have you been to London? Has she will become has she, yeah? Has she read? Has she read the book? And finally, I have not seen her becomes haven't. I haven't seen her. Okay. It sounds very different, I'm sure, when you use these weaker sounds. Yeah. So compare I have been to London with I've been to London. Right? They sound really, really different. So let's think about some collocations, words we very often use with the present perfect. So the first word we're going to look at here is ever, like have you ever. So we use ever in questions when we want to talk about experiences. Yep. Have you ever won some money? Put it before the participle for me, the main verb there. Just we use in positive sentences, and it means something which has happened very recently. For example, I've just arrived. We use yet in negative sentences and in questions to ask if something has happened. Have you finished your homework yet? Or I haven't finished my homework yet. And we use already in positive sentences to say that something happened earlier than expected or before now. And we put this before the main verb, okay? He's already made dinner. You don't need to cook. These are the grammar rules. If you listen to L1 speakers of English in informal conversations, you will definitely hear variations on these, okay? But if you're planning to do any English exams, follow these rules for now. Right. Now, I said before we just do some revision with for and since because it's something that very often causes problems for people. So we use these words when an action say when an action started or how long that action is. The rule is for is with periods of time. For example, I've studied English for 10 years. And since is with specific dates. For example, I've studied English since 1998. Okay? Remember, guys, if you want to know when an action started, it's more common to say, how long have you studied English, for example, instead of saying, when did you start to study English? Yeah. The more natural question is, how long have you studied English? Okay, so here's a little practice for you. Have a quick look at those examples and think about whether you would use for or since. Let's look at the answers. So here we have a period of time. So we're using for. Here we have a specific date. So we're using since. Here we have a specific date. So we're using since. Here we have a period of time. So we're using for. And that last one is a specific date again. So we're using since. Yeah. Okay, guys, so here's your last little practice. Okay, this time we're going to think about forming questions. So again, take another minute. I'd like you to form the questions. Yeah. And then we're going to check our answers, but we're also going to think about the correct pronunciation. Yeah. So this is going to be a little challenge for you guys. So take another minute, complete the questions, and try and say the words. So let's have a look at those answers. So our first one here, guys, have you ever been to London? How long have you studied English? Have you read Lord of the Rings? Now, these ones which are a bit harder, how long have you lived in your house? Where have you been in Europe? Have you seen the film Grease? Have you ever been in a band? And how long have you known your best friend? Okay. Now, if we say these words quickly, remember that we're going to think here about the content words, right? The words which are emphasized and carry meaning. They're the words which I'm going to emphasize when I speak. And the ones that are important here will be words like ever, been, or London. Okay, they're the ones that communicate meaning. My other words aren't so important. Here we've got how long studied English, read Lord Rings, how long lived house, where been Europe, seen film Grease, been band, and how long known best friend. Okay, those are my keywords. Now, when I am speaking, I'm going to emphasize those, and the other words I'm going to squash together, and I'm going to use my schwa. Yeah. So this is what we looked at before with the pronunciation of have you. Okay. So this is where it's going to be a bit different, guys. And for example, here, I'm going to make that contraction, not have you ever, but have you. Have you ever? Okay. So have you ever been to London? Have you ever been to London? How long have you studied English? How long have you studied English? Have you read Lord of the Rings? Have you read Lord of the Rings? How long have you lived in your house? How long have you lived in your house? Where have you been in Europe? Where have you been in Europe? Have you seen the film Grease? Have you seen the film Grease? Have you ever been in a band? Have you ever been in a band? How long have you known your best friend? How long have you known your best friend? Okay, so we're working with our content words, and those other words, especially our have you in our auxiliary questions, which aren't very important, get squashed together, and we're applying that weak vowel sound, the schwa. Okay, so remember that working with this rhythm is what's going to really improve your listening skills, and also your fluency in English, right? You're going to understand people a lot better, but you are going to be a better communicator when you're speaking as well. So I have a little pronunciation challenge for you guys, okay? And I want you to do some pronunciation training. So the sentences we just looked at before, yeah, in the previous slide, I want you to try saying those sentences every day this week. I want you to record your first try, and on Sunday, I want you to record your final try. And then I want you to compare the two and see if you've managed to improve your fluency and your pronunciation of those weak forms with the have you. Yeah, okay. So this kind of training is such a great way to really work with improving the rhythm of your spoken English. And like I said, consequently improving your listening in English as well. Yeah. So this will be available on our YouTube channel if you're not studying with us. So you can go back and look at those sentences. Yep. If you are studying with us, you'll find the PDF in our Google Classroom for you to try with. And please leave us a comment. I'd love to know how you guys get on and if you notice any improvement in your pronunciation.